Okay, we talked a little bit about the lymphatic system when we talked about blood vessels, but let's just dive a little bit deeper into it. This is actually a fairly short module. So as we mentioned, it drains the excess interstitial fluid and plasma proteins from that interstitial space. We'll see this again, number 2 we'll see again when we get to digestive system, but it helps transport dietary lipids and vitamins from the gastrointestinal tract, that's what GI stands for, gastrointestinal tract, to the blood. Some of these are going to be too large to go directly into a blood vessel. It will also help facilitate immune responses. This will be a much bigger role as we talk about like lymph nodes and things like that. But in general, those lymph nodes are going to recognize microbes or sometimes abnormal cells, and they'll respond to them by killing them directly or secreting antibodies that cause their destruction. And we will talk much more about this in the next chapter when we talk about the immune system. Okay, so there's your lymphatic system. Because part of its job is going to be immune surveillance. It's going to be pretty much scattered throughout your body with sort of these checkpoints that are called lymph nodes. There's 2 general categories. One is the primary lymphatic organs, and number 2 is secondary. It's easy enough. The primary lymphatic organs is where your stem cells divide and mature into B and T lymphocytes. So there's just 2 places for those, the red bone marrow and then the thymus. So I think B for bone, T for thymus. Okay, so B cells mature here, T cells mature here. And then the secondary lymphatic organs is where the immune responses occur. So lymph nodes, spleen, lymphatic nodules. We'll talk more about these. You'll hear about lymphatic nodules again when we get into not just the immune system, but also the digestive tract. Lots of lymphatic nodules in the intestines. The fluid that flows through your lymphatic organs is going to be very similar to interstitial fluid, and it's simply called lymph. So let's take a look at the thymus as the primary lymphatic organ. So again, this is going to be a primary lymphatic organ, so this is where T cells are going to develop. Not surprisingly, it's fairly large in infants. You can see this is about 70 grams, but it's fairly small. It shrinks down to about 3 grams in the adult. Here is the thymus in location, so superior to the heart, between either of the 2 lungs. I have a link here to an interesting Radiolab story. I'll just tell you about it briefly. So back in the day, what happened was that the way that people learned medicine was through a lot of times the corpses of deceased sick individuals, and the same was true for learning about pediatrics. So a lot of times the kids that they would get, the bodies that they would get of children, were ones that were particularly sickly, and they saw this very large thymus. And what they thought was that the enlarged thymus was actually crushing their trachea and their ability to breathe, and therefore a healthy thymus was actually a small thymus. So what they did, and this was sort of around the 40s, 50s, was if you were a good parent, you would take your child to the doctor and have their thymus irradiated. Well, the way that they would do this is that the mom hold the child on her lap, and then they would basically angle radioactive isotope at the thymus. And if you kind of think about how big a kid is and where the thymus is, it's not like radiation just stops when it hits a target. It goes straight through you, like X-rays, for example. And guess what is sort of directly behind the child's thymus? Behind the child. It's about where the mom's chest would be. So not surprisingly, a lot of women in this era also develop breast cancers because of this. So kind of the health fad of the time, there's always something. They quickly learned that irradiating a thymus was actually very detrimental to the individual. It didn't allow these T cells that are an important part of the immune system to fully develop, which led to later problems with illnesses in the child, and then also breast cancer in the mom. But anyway, listen to the whole Radiolab. It's a pretty good story. All right, back to the thymus. The thymus has a cortex and a medulla, and just kind of keep that in mind. Many of our organs will have a cortex, which is an outer layer, and then a central medulla. The thymus is no different. In the cortex, there's a large number of T cells, specifically immature T cells, or you can call them pre-Ts. They originally form in the red bone marrow. However, they migrate to the thymus, specifically the cortex, where they'll continue to divide and mature. There are also these cells called dendritic cells. We'll see those in the immune system as well. They're called dendritic cells because they have lots of these projections that come off of them. They are a type of monocyte, and they're going to help in T cell maturation. More specifically, they will present different things to these immature T cells and see how they react. There are epithelial cells, which are thought to help educate T cells, and then macrophages are there to gobble up anything that basically shouldn't be there or clear any dead cells away. As we move toward the medulla, so again here you can see the cortex and the central medulla area. Now we're going to have mature T cells, again some of these epithelial cells, dendritic cells, macrophages, as well as some of these these other structures called Hassel's corpuscles, or they're called thymic corpuscles. These are sites of T cell death. Very, very, very few of the actual T cells that make it to the thymus actually make it to maturity. Many of them are actually killed off by the body's immune system, either because they cannot properly recognize a foreign antigen, or because they mistakenly think that the body itself is a foreign antigen, and so they're basically destroyed before they can do any kind of damage. All right, so this is our primary lymphatic organ. We're not going to talk about red bone marrow, but in the thymus where these T cells develop, again, that's what makes it a primary lymphatic organ. It's a site of T cell maturation. Now, our secondary lymphatic organs, remember this is where most of our immune reactions are going to occur. One of the main ones are going to be our lymph nodes. Again, it has a cortex and then a medulla. So here you can see the cortex, the outer cortex, and then this inner medulla area. In the cortex, there's two other layers to it, but it's not quite so important. I'm not going to ask you to know that quite at that level. But just to be a little bit more specific, the outer cortex has these areas where B cells are going to aggregate. These are called lymphatic nodules or follicles. Those B cells that have mostly those lymphatic nodules that are mostly consisting of B cells are called primary lymphatic nodules. When a B cell recognizes a foreign microbe or an antigen, they will develop into plasma cells, and once they activate, the primary lymphatic nodule now is considered a secondary lymphatic nodule. In the inner cortex, we don't have these nodules. There's no B cells. It's mostly T cells and dendritic cells. Those dendritic cells, just like we saw in the thymus, are going to present antigens to the T cells. And we'll learn more about this in the immune system, but the B cells are able to recognize foreign microbes or antigens by themselves. They don't have to have it presented to them. T cells, on the other hand, need to have it presented to them. And there'll be 3 cells we'll learn about that do this presentation. One of those is the dendritic cells. And once they recognize it, the T cells will then start to proliferate, or they start to divide, is another way to say that. Some of those T cells will then go to the areas where there is the foreign microbe is invading, and it will basically kill it at that site. Again, we'll get into a little bit more of the specifics of how that happens in the immune system. In the medulla area, we have B cells and then plasma cells. So plasma cells, again, are just mature activated B cells. The name changes. So we call it B cell, and a plasma cell when it's activated, and its job is to produce antibodies. There are also macrophages in this medulla area. So basically one of the key things to think about as far as these lymph nodes go is how the flow works. So if we think about this out here, we have all these B cells, macrophages, some T cells, and again, some plasma cells. So as flow is going through this lymph node and it goes in one direction, if there's anything that has been picked up in a lymphatic capillary from any body region, it will be funneled through here, and it has to make its way past a whole bunch of B cells, dendritic cells, T cells, macrophages. At some point, something will catch that there is a foreign microbe or some sort of antigen, something that shouldn't be there, and it will activate the immune system. Okay, another secondary lymphatic organ is the spleen. This is going to be located on your left-hand side between the stomach and the diaphragm. The hilus is going to be another term, so kind of keep this term in mind. We'll hear this quite a bit. But basically, in some of these organs where there's large blood vessels or tubes entering and or leaving is called the hilus, hilum for singular. So that's just right here where these blood vessels are entering and leaving. It has both has two sort of part function. One is the lymphatic function, so there's a white pulp to it, and that's in this image here in white. That's where you find lymphocytes and macrophages. And then the other part is red pulp, and that's filled with blood and splenic tissue. Again, remember the spleen is one of those organs that helps recycle red blood cells. It also acts as a blood reservoir. So that's going to be in the red pulp. Another secondary lymphatic organ will be a lymphatic nodule, and we'll see these particularly in our digestive tract. So you will see these, let me back up. They're considered a nodule and not a node because there's no capsule around them. So you can kind of see here, this is the image of the intestine. There are these groupings of cell which are very obvious, these clusters, but there's no capsule around them. There's no connective tissue holding them all together. It's just clusters of cells. So that's why it's a nodule and not a node, like a lymph node. Okay, you'll find them in the mucous membranes, so again, the gastrointestinal tract, urinary tract, parts of the reproductive tract, as well as respiratory airways. These in the ileum of the small intestine are particularly large, and so they have their own name. They're called Peyer's patches. You'll find them in the appendix, as well as the tonsils at the top of your throat. So you have your adenoids, which are your pharyngeal tonsil, the palatine tonsil, which is on either side wall in the back of your throat. There's also a lingual tonsil in the back of your tongue. So basically, I mean, you know how many things, as you're breathing in, as you're eating something, as you're, again, breathing in air. All of those are there to catch any kind of foreign microbe that may be trying to get inside your body and respond to it before it gets any further. So this is why sometimes when you get sick, you might just have a head cold. You might feel like your lymph nodes or lymphatic nodules, your tonsils are kind of swollen in your throat or in your throat, back of your throat, in your mouth. But it doesn't go all the way down into like your chest or your arms or your legs, right? It stays localized right there because you don't want to have a systemic infection. The same will be true. I'm just going to scroll back up. The same will be similarly true when we talk about the way that lymph nodes function. So, for example, like in other body parts. So let's say, for example, we have a cut on our right arm. That infection may spread, but it's caught by the lymph nodes usually in that arm, so it doesn't go systemically. We may see lymph nodes in that region swell in response, but it's not like all of them swell in the whole body. Similarly, things that will travel in lymphatic fluid will be things like cancer cells. So again, you may see, and you may have heard of this, like when doctors operate and they take out cancerous tissue, they sometimes take the lymph nodes in that region as well, because the cancerous tissue may be stuck there and you don't want it to somehow get past that lymph node and then travel to another body site. Okay, hopefully that made sense. I'll stop here and then we'll have one more video for this unit. And again, as always, if you have any questions, please let me know.